Okay, so let me introduce our third speaker, Andrew Basden from the University of Salford. Over to you, Andrew.
Hello. Towards an integrative vision for systems thinking. I've been involved in systems thinking since the late 70s, early 80s. Well, involved, no. I was introduced to it and I loved it. But I've been on the edge of systems thinking since then, as a kind of semi-outside observer and semi-inside practitioner. And during that time, I've seen a number of issues being discussed and so on, and I want to discuss those today. One is complexity. There's parts and wholes, or systems and subsystems, if you like, levels, and of course the issue of emergence. There's environment, issues of environment and boundaries. There's issues of the external, internal operation of systems. There's also the issue of social structures or constraints, and then the systems in practice, hard systems, soft systems, and critical systems thinking. I'm actually an applied philosopher, or rather, I apply philosophy. Specifically, the philosophy of Herman Dooyeweerd, a Dutch mid-20th century guy who's not very well known, but I discovered him because of aspects of everyday experience. He's arguably the best philosopher of everyday life that we currently have.
What's pistic, please?
Sorry?
Pistic.
I'm going to explain those. Aspects are spheres of meaning and law, each with a kernel meaningfulness. They are ways in which reality can be meaningful. Now, Dooyeweerd delineated 15. He didn't say this is the final truth. He said, well, this is my best guess, and it's a superset, if you like, of other things like Boulding and Maslow and everything else. Take a system that, for example, a conversation. Think of a conversation as a system. There's a quantitative aspect to it, the number of people involved. Spatial aspect of how people are arranged. There's movement. There's physical aspect of the light and the air through which vibrations passes. There's biotic aspect of the health of the participants, and that affects the conversation. There's a sensitive or sensory or psychical aspect, which is to do with hearing and feeling, and also sort of animal emotion of like fear and hunger and things like that, and that affects the conversation. The analytical aspect is to do with conceptualization, distinction, clarity. Formative aspect is our human formative power, ability to form our thoughts and form material as well. The lingual aspect is, of course, the center of the conversation, as we talk and so on, and express our thoughts in symbols, not just speech, but also gestures. There's a social aspect of a conversation where we treat each other as people and not just information sources. Economic aspect of frugality in a conversation. Aesthetic aspect of harmony and interest and delight, enjoyment of a conversation. Juridical aspect, if you like, is justice, due, appropriateness, not going off on tangents, not cheating and so on. The ethical aspect is not right and wrong. It's what is good. It's goodness. It is going beyond what is due. It is generous attitude and self-giving love. And pistic is the Greek word from pistis, meaning faith, vision, commitment. So a conversation, do the participants believe what they're saying, or are they putting on a sham? Or do they trust one another? It's to do with trust. It's to do with vision, commitment. It also includes religious and ideological belief. So all these things are aspects of a conversation, or, I'm going to say, any other system. So there's my introduction. I'm going to take these aspects through this talk. So there's the 7 things I'm going to talk about, 2 minutes each or whatever. let's take the first one. A mess, or if you like, complexity. Now, I wish I'd had Harvey's screen of the food system. That's much better. That was real complexity. I just tried to put a little bit of complexity here. But how can we understand complexity? How can we deal with it? Reductionism is something that fired, motivated early systems thinkers. Anti-reductionism, into holism, and of course Smuts was the guy who coined that term. And then Ashby, law of requisite variety, saying that the control system needs to have at least as many states as the system is trying to control. But, and I'm going to use this light blue for a but. I'm going to say, but wait a minute, what's the problem here? What constitutes a state? Are we talking about the state of each atom in a system? Are we talking about the state of each cell or each organ, or mental and emotional states? Are we talking about respect, states of respect for each other? We're talking about states of motivation. What is a state? What do we take into account in Ashby's law? And Dooyeweerd offers his aspects. So, motivation, of each atom is physical states, there's biotic states, there's psychic and sensitive states. Respect is a social state, motivation is probably a pistic state. And with this view in mind, then holism may be defined as taking all aspects into account, and reductionism is when we cut everything down to a single aspect, whether it's physical materialism or whether it's economism or whatever it is, in managerialism and so on. So there's an idea of how Dooyeweerd can contribute to that issue. Now parts and wholes. So we get hierarchies and Patty's hierarchy theory and various people like that. At various levels, parts and wholes. But one problem is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I've got Ackoff tried to deal with that and suggested that purpose is what is greater than the sum of the parts. But whence purpose? And Dooyeweerd suggests the idea of a qualifying aspect. So we've had aspects. What he's saying is that each type of system, each type of whole, and Dooyeweerd thought of in terms of wholes rather than of parts. He didn't think of parts and wholes as of equal ontic value, but a part has no meaning in itself apart from its whole. So, take for example a body. It's a biotic whole, a lung of a body. Within the body, it is a biotic part. But if you take it out onto a bench and feed it with blood and so on, and it pumps air. But it is no longer a lung. All it is a complex air pump, a physical thing. So he had this idea, sort of fairly systematic idea of what a part and a whole is, depending on what its meaning is in its context. And I find that helpful to help clarify parts and wholes. But there's another problem. There are other kinds of things that are not parts and wholes. Is an orchestra, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, is that part of Birmingham? It's not quite right to say it's part of Birmingham, is it? Somehow it's not quite a part, but it's associated with Birmingham. A forest and its trees and insects and the fungi and so on. Dooyeweerd borrowed the idea of encapsis from a Swiss biologist as a different kind of relationship, and he identified these as territorial and correlative encapsis. I'm not going to explain them, but then there are three others. A hermit crab finds a shell and adopts it. Tree and its fungi is symbiosis, or a statue and its marble. And wholes, these wholes have meaning separately from each other. So, for example, a city is a social whole, whereas an orchestra is an aesthetic whole, and so on. And the Dooyeweerd's idea of encapsis, it's not a complete theory yet, but I find it a very useful antidote to the idea of parts and wholes, and systems thinking might benefit. Next, Newell, levels. So Alan Newell, the artificial intelligence guy in the 1980s, said there are computer systems levels, materials, abstract components, bits, symbols, and the knowledge. He was arguing for the knowledge level. But what levels are possible, and how do they relate to each other? And Dooyeweerd suggests, or rather I suggest, using Dooyeweerd, that each level can be seen as an aspect. So the materials is the physical level, arguably that's the biotic level, arguably. Cycle is the bit level, symbol level is actually these two, and knowledge level is the lingual aspect. That's what I've argued in somewhere else. But you can look at Bunge's systems levels and various others and map them into aspects, and it's surprising how much agreement there is, and agreement without order. But how do levels relate to each other? One answer is emergence. But the problem with emergence is, are we smuggling in meaning? So if we say life emerges from physical chemical things, how do we recognise life if we don't already know what it is? Environment. Of course, some things like marginalisation, but I'm not going to deal with those. I'm going to deal with the problem of multiple boundaries. So take an orchestra. What's its boundary? Well, it's got a musical boundary, institutional boundary, geographical boundary, and Dooyeweerd brings in this idea of, well, an orchestra functions in all aspects together. And therefore it has multiple boundaries, each defined by a different aspect. And so you can think of other boundaries, like the jargon boundary, or the budgetary boundary, or the legal boundary of the orchestra. Next, there's two things here, external and internal operation. The external operation is looking at the system from the outside, and the common thing is a system transforms inputs into outputs. But there's a problem. It's very easy to make category errors, especially in practice. You know, we're a company that mines minerals, and we transform it into profits. There's something wrong with that. But how do we explain what's wrong? What is not very helpful with such a transformation, such a view? Dooyeweerd says that we function in all the aspects, and so does a system. Every system, including that company, functions in all the aspects. So, its processing of minerals is physical functioning, its generation of profits is economic functioning, but there are others in between. And they're all going on simultaneously, and that is the multi-aspectual functioning of the system. The internal operation of the system is probably to do with resilience. So, for example, there's VSM, of course. I'm not going to deal with that, but autopoiesis, Maturana says it's scientific now. Gerald has criticised Maturana for a number of things. But what I'm interested in is Luhmann. Niklas Luhmann tried to apply it to social systems and realised it needed rethinking. But how? Luhmann's answer wasn't very convincing, at least to me. But Dooyeweerd suggests that Dooyeweerd's got an idea of inter-aspect dependency, each aspect depending on the ones lower. So social functioning depends on good lingual functioning, i.e. communication and so on. So, biological resilience depends on good physical functioning, social resilience depends on good lingual functioning. And that, I think, might offer a new approach to autopoiesis, seeing it as a pair of aspects, one depending on the lower one. Finally, the second last is constraint. It's a system and I feel trapped. You know, so the problem, so we're talking about social structures, and a number of thinkers have thought of that, but the problem we have is that we're not talking about a system in an environment here, but the system as the environment in which agents function. How do we link this with other traditional systems thinking? Luhmann tried, but I'm not sure I'm convinced by him. Dooyeweerd took a very different type. Rather than thinking of entities or systems and their processes, he made meaning fundamental. And then the aspects are a kind of ocean of meaningfulness in which both the system, the environment and the agent function, the structures and the agent function together. And from this perspective, there is no distinction between system and environment, agent and system as environment. But rather, there are subject relationships going on. And this, I think, starts to make this a non-problem. Finally, practice. Hard systems thinking is concerned with objective reality, soft systems thinking with subjective interpretation. Critical systems thinking tries to get a bit of both. Norms as something objective and trans-subjective, and yet it presupposes subjective interpretation. And yet, this ends up in paradoxes like enforced emancipation. There's an incommensurability, a deep paradox here. And Dooyeweerd, first of all, explains it by his theory of ground motives. Ground motives are spiritual driving forces that last centuries and are usually dialectic. And here is two cliffs with a gulf between them, where the last 500 years has been driven by the dialectic of nature and freedom, control and freedom. But he also offers a way of bringing commensurability, overcoming the incommensurability. He's got the idea of ground ideas and looking at the aspects. So these three look at the world in different ways and have a different vision of the world using different rationalities. And so they are no longer deeply incommensurable. And in fact, they can work together. So, now let's summarise. Here are the 7 issues that I've been talking about in systems thinking, and here is how Dooyeweerd, I believe, can help us think about these things. So my message is that we can enrich systems thinking with Dooyeweerd's philosophy. But it's only just started. This is only an overview. So the challenge is, who would like to come and join us to develop this idea?
Thank you. Time for one question. Then I'll ask if you're okay
Right,
with that.
okay.
So when I see the quantitative, which was the lowest one of your aspects, I tend to think that there's something prior to that, and that's making distinctions, because you can only count if there are things that are distinguished. Does that make everything above it epistemological rather than ontological?
A very good question. How long do we have? Actually, quantitative is not to do with counting. Counting does involve analytical distinction. So when we count, we're functioning analytically and also quantitatively. It's rather to do with think intuitively about amount. The idea of more and less. And basically that's it. There's not necessarily even precise numbers. There's the idea of any particular amount, let's say 4.5, is always 4.5 and always less than 4.6 and more than 4.4, etc., etc. But don't think in terms of counting.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Great thing about the Amiga is you can just switch it off.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that you're doing this on an Amiga.
I think it's a wonderful machine. But,